What's up? All right, I saw this yesterday, and I was gonna do a video yesterday, but I was busy. I couldn't be bothered. So here I am reacting to this Jeremy Corbyn character again, and I don't really want to be doing videos only on Jeremy Corbyn. That's kind of lame. He's not even the Labour leader in a few days, but whatever. We're gonna check Jeremy Corbyn out, what he thinks about the whole what's going on. Clue's kind of in the title. Let's enjoy.
Jeremy Corbyn, the world is going through a terrifying public health crisis. It's now very quickly turning into a huge economic crisis as well.
Double true.
If things have been different in that general election, you'd have been the man steering us through. How would you have handled it?
I hope we'd have started onto it more quickly and recognised the seriousness of it from the World Health Organization warnings that were sent out in January from...
How would you have handled things differently? Well, I hope. I mean, even the language is kind of wet, but I hope we'd have started things sooner. And you know what? I like the idea that, I would have done things quicker, maybe. You never know. Done what quicker? What, you would have started things sooner. You'd have recognized it. You'd have worked things out. You'd have somehow, you personally would have had the foresight to see how big a deal this would have been, even though most people, nations, governments, leaders across the entire planet hadn't quite worked out that this would become as big a deal as it would have become. But you personally would have you'd have got it. You'd have been like, guys, you'd have been, because bear in mind, right, the idea that, you know, Boris Johnson is sitting in a room on his own making decisions, he's just in charge, and, you know, he just says, we're going to do this. It's a lot of intelligent people. They're all coming in, they're advising. So the Covid-19 thing would have started. They would have got the advice before the media. They would have got they'd have way more information than we know. They'd have been sitting there, the medical scientists, the medical officers, the chief, the people with Sir before their name, really intelligent people would have said, look, this is what this looks like. These are the implications. Military advisors would have said, this is what could happen if civil unrest. They would have had charts and graphs and all kinds of things. And they would have advised him, I think we should do this. I think this is an idea and this is an idea. And based on all of that information together, he would have come to an idea. But no, apparently, according to Jeremy Corbyn, he personally would have went, guys, I hear what you're saying. But no, I've worked it out. This is going to be this big. I've seen into the future. We're going to start testing now. We're going to purchase millions of pounds worth of testing equipment, because I just know this is going to become a pandemic. To me, that's just ridiculous. It's just so ridiculous and unhelpful and just dishonest.
China, and recognise that the only way you can get on top of it is by knowing how severe it is, and that means testing. The fact.
And also, it's brilliant. It's not that he would have done anything differently, other than the most focused news bullet point at the moment for the problem that Boris Johnson has. The thing the news is focusing on now, because we tried focusing on the whole, he didn't lock down soon enough, but people kind of looked at that and be like, nah, I don't know, yeah, you can't just be like, oh look, there's a virus, lockdown immediately to one of the biggest cities on earth. So people kind of understand that, okay, yeah, that kind of made sense, and that was based on advice. But the testing thing now, it's like, not enough people are being tested, and lo and behold, as if by magical chance, Jeremy Corbyn would have ramped up testing. Like, dude, if you don't watch South Park, you should watch South Park. But this dude right now is Captain Hindsight. Stop what you're doing now and Google Captain Hindsight. This guy is Captain Hindsight. He flies to the center of the disaster and tells everyone what they should have done in the past. This is what they should have done, and then everything would have been fine. I just think it's amazing that this guy has jumped on this chance to be like, it's just ridiculous, not enough testing. And it's like, yeah, that's what everyone else was saying. It's the most obvious line to go with. It's so wet.
The fact that we are not yet even testing 10,000 people a day.
We're not even testing 10,000 people a day. Now, all I have to say to that is arbitrary numbers are arbitrary. I could say it for anything. We're not even testing 100,000 people a day. We're not even testing 55,000 people a day. Do you know it's ridiculous? We're not even testing 1.87 million people a day. It's just any number. Like, how many number of tests are the standard number of tests for a COVID-19 pandemic testing regime? Like, what? It's just absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous that we're not testing 10,000 people a day. It's like, okay. How many people should it have been? Like, if you were sitting there 6 months ago and someone said to you, during a pandemic, how many people should be being tested per day for COVID-19? You'd have said, at least 10,000. That's what he would have said.
Is very, very serious indeed. There are almost 500,000 people working in the NHS and the care sector. Even they have not yet been tested. It is ludicrous. We've got to get on top of testing.
It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous that we're not testing more people. Now, you may or may not understand how the economies work, and with what's going on in the entire world with regards to these tests, but you can imagine across the entire planet, right, the demand for COVID-19 tests is fairly high. Like, you know, any companies making COVID-19 tests, they're probably being purchased at a ridiculous rate. Everyone in the world is trying to get their hands on as many of these as possible, and some people are going to lose out. Some people aren't going to get as many tests as they want. What's better put, everyone's going to lose out because demand is that high. Everyone wants more tests than we have. Duh. Because it's a international, global pandemic. It's not just an issue for one or two countries and he just can't be bothered to spend the money. There are finite tests, limited supply, and effectively infinite demand, meaning supplies will always be short. Every country in the world hasn't got as many tests as they would like to have. And the idea that this guy's riding in on his white horse saying, oh, it's ridiculous, these people aren't being tested. It's like, well, what would you have done? Would you have bought them all out long before any of the other nations worked out that this was a thing that needed to be bought? No one knew this was going to get this big. People didn't predict it was going to get this big. Or better put, not sufficient numbers of people predicted it was going to get this big for you to have been able to see the foresight to be able to have purchased enough tests to allay this particular problem. It's ridiculous that he feels that after the fact he would have before the fact have known the things he only knows after the fact.
So just to be clear, you don't think it's about the speed and scale of the crisis and the growth of the epidemic? You think rather the testing failures have been because the government's dropped the ball?
Now that is the world's most leading question. That's like, okay, just to be clear, right? You're firing shots. That's basically, like what she just said kind of there is like, you know when you were at school and you were having an argument with someone, there was someone on the sidelines going, oh my God, did you hear what he said? He was insulting your mum. He said your mum is so fat, like your mum can't stop eating. Like she keeps eating and the food goes in her stomach and it makes her fat. And then everyone looks and they're like, oh, are you going to take that? That's kind of what she wants the soundbite here. And what's Jeremy Corbyn? Is Jeremy Corbyn going to say, you know what I would say in this situation? I would say, you know what? It's difficult. The pandemic caught us all with our pants down. It's really surprising. It's been difficult for any government to handle this. That would be the thing I would say, you know, because mistakes were made, but not really mistakes. This is what happens. It's caught us all by surprise. That's how a pandemic like this would work. You know, no one was expecting this thing would get this big and people be locked down into their homes across the entire planet. But here we are. So you have to give them a little bit of a, you know, fair enough, easy to miss. But instead,
it's both. It has obviously been a very fast-moving crisis. We do have to bring it under control. Testing is a very, very important way of it, but also the superhuman efforts of people throughout the NHS to free up beds, to bring staff back, to bring retired staff back, and now to open 3 new hospitals is wonderful, and we should applaud them. But
one sec, hold on. Did he just say well done to the NHS opening 3 new hospitals, doing all this stuff, but somehow that wasn't the government that did that? So when the NHS does something well, that the government's not involved in that. They didn't do any of that. That was just the NHS. But when the NHS is struggling, that's the government's fault. Better put, Boris Johnson, Tory government's fault. So let's prop up the NHS because, you know, that always makes you look good. You know, saying nice things about the NHS and clapping, that makes me look like a nice, honest, decent person. Right? The NHS, we have to say, they've done a magnificent job, and they obviously have. But it's such a wet line. It's such a the NHS have done well. We have to applaud them. We really must. But also,
we shouldn't have had 10 years of austerity when we ended up with 94% bed occupancy in the NHS, and obviously a difficulty in coping because of that.
When Boris Johnson says, as he did in his video address that he did last night, that the ambition is to really ramp up tests and that's what they're really doing, does it irritate you given that that's not the reality on the ground?
I love her. She's the leading question creator. Does it? It's not even a real question. Are you irritated? Like, yeah, I'm irritated. And the idea that we're not attempting to ramp up testing as much as we possibly can is is nonsense. Obviously, testing is being ramped up to the maximum amount it could be ramped up. That's what's happening right now. It's one of the most primary focuses of the government, of every government around the country. It's not a lie. We're ramping up testing as much as possibly can be done. But then it
irritates me a great deal when
it does.
Nearly 3 weeks ago, John Ashworth and I met him to raise these very points with him, saying the importance of getting on top of testing. And it seemed to me that the facilities of the government to get that testing done have simply not been effective.
Again, national, international crisis. Limited number of tests. Everyone is trying across the planet to get as many tests as possible and do as much testing as possible. But it's difficult to create infrastructure and procure items when the demand is so high and the supply is finite. The idea that you said to him, we need to do more testing, we need to do more testing, and at the same time, if you heard the briefings, that the chief scientists are always saying the same thing. We need to do more testing. We need to do more testing. Is the idea that Boris Johnson sat there and went, nah, I don't really feeling it. I can't be bothered to test. So let's just not. Or is the idea that he tried to get testing done but just couldn't work it out? All the members of the government, they all came together, but because of Boris Johnson's idiocy, he just couldn't work out how to get the testing done. Oh wait, do I buy this one or do I? Is that the idea that he couldn't work out what to do? It's just a problem. I really hate the idea of, in a crisis like this, someone sees an opportunity to take a few political shots. Whereas not a single thing was said here to highlight, oh, actually, it's quite difficult. Actually, boy, I don't envy his position. Actually, he's done pretty well here, here, and here. Oh, actually, whilst I would have done this differently, ultimately, I'm not entirely sure it would have worked out for the best. Or I say it's easy to say that now with hindsight. I'd like to think I would have done that. But, you know, again, it's hard to be certain. There's no shred of decency or humanity in appraising the ridiculous situation that the Prime Minister is obviously in. No one expects to become Prime Minister and have to deal with an international pandemic. That's nonsense. No one would expect that. This has caught everyone by surprise. And everything he's got to say is, this is what's wrong. This is ridiculous. This isn't good enough. I'd have done this. I'd be better at this. And it's just such a useless line. It's so useless. Everyone in the country right now knows that the number of COVID-19 tests is one of the most significant issues right now. Everyone's trying to ramp that up as much as possible. And before he jumps on the, okay, what can be done to help? He's just looking at it as an opportunity to boost labor up. And it's just, I find it so weak. It's so unimportant right now. I just find it so unimportant right now to be trying to get political shots in, rather than everyone grab an oar and row. Like, everyone try and do your best, do your part, join in, help out. This guy's taking shots and it just doesn't help. It doesn't help the nation. It just makes everyone feel more tense. And I just think, I'm not impressed.
What did he say he would do three weeks ago?
He said that at that time they were testing at 5,000 a day and it was going to increase as quickly as possible. Here we are now.
Wait, he said it's going to increase as quickly as possible. Isn't that what happened? Or are you saying he didn't increase as quickly as possible? He was lying. He wasn't really trying. Is he pocketing the money? Is he keeping all the tests for himself? Like, what's the accusation?
All these weeks later, we're not even yet reaching 10,000 a day. And it's apparently because there's a shortage of test equipment, because the NHS was not able to purchase it when it needed to, because they seem to be running on the idea that it wasn't necessary to test. It is absolutely... How can you possibly have...
Whoa! You see how he ran off with it. Apparently, it's because listen to this answer. This is when if you're ever talking to somebody and you want to know if they're telling you porkies, they're telling lies, right? You can tell because their sentences keep going on. They keep going on and they fade down and they speed up at certain points. So they say a little bit and they say another bit and they say another bit, and this is how it works. So it's the reason is because there was a thing and then the thing and then the lie comes in. It wasn't a bit of that, and then they carry on. And so this is where somebody, not necessarily a black lie, but this is a bit where he's a bit unsure about. He doesn't really want to say this quite perfectly like this. He wants to say it a bit differently. Let's hear him say it.
Because there's a shortage of not going to increase as quickly as possible. Here we are now, all these weeks later, we're not even yet reaching 10,000 a day. Okay, and it's apparently because there's a shortage of test equipment, because the NHS was not able to purchase it when it needed to because they seemed to be running on the idea that it wasn't necessary to test. It is absolutely. How can you possibly have an idea of how many people have CV unless you test?
Okay, if you've been watching the briefings, there is no point at which anyone has been saying it's not necessary to test. No point. The only reason he thinks it is necessary to test is because he's been told by the same people that told Boris Johnson it's necessary to test. And at those points, everyone has been trying to get as many tests as possible. Across the world, different people have worked out it's been necessary to test at different rates, just because that's the way it goes. You know, maybe in Abu Dhabi, they worked it out on the 1st. And maybe in USA, they worked it out on the 2nd. And maybe in Italy, they worked it out on the 4th. And everyone's worked it out at a different rate, how necessary and important it is to test. And at those points, they've diverted a significant amount of resources to getting the maximum amount of tests they possibly can. Everyone's worked it out a different way. UK has done the 12th highest number of tests across the planet by country. If you analyze it by population in millions, it's actually fairly lower. It's like, I think it's like they're in 30th place. But in terms of numbers of actual tests that have been done, there are only 11 countries on the planet that have done more tests than United Kingdom. So however you look at it, tests are being done, right? Lots of tests are being done. But obviously, you can always say more tests could be done. Of course, more tests could be done. But the idea that somebody in the government, Boris Johnson, some advisor, was under the impression that, we don't need to do any tests. We don't need to do any tests. Since the briefings have started, it's been the only thing that's been said. We've got to do tests. 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 But it's not just him saying that. It's every country across the entire planet saying we've got to do tests. There's a shortage. It's as simple as that. It's a shortage. It's a shortage. 3-4 weeks ago, nobody thought we would need millions of tests. Nobody thought we would need millions upon millions of tests. Nobody was under that impression. Nobody thought that. There was no company that had millions and millions and millions of tests ready to go. This is a surprise, and so they're manufacturing them now as quickly as they possibly can, and everyone's missing out. Everyone's got done fewer tests than they would have ideally liked to have done. But this guy here is sitting in a chair telling everybody, everyone in the media is talking about there's not quite enough tests. Well, I think there's not enough tests. And if I were in power, there would have been enough tests. Obviously, I'm not, and I never will be, so we'll never get to know for sure. But you're just going to have to take my word for it. I would have done more tests. I would also have recognized this earlier because I would have seen it coming earlier. And also, I don't know anything that's happening in the future, so I'm not going to make any predictions. Well, since I have all this, foresight. But after it happens, so when there's another problem and we can all latch onto that, if you come and interview me again, I will then tell you all the things I actually know now, but I'll only tell you them then. Anyway, that's my analysis for this. Peace.